The massive, crystalline dome of the Galactic Council stretched high above the assembled delegates, its walls shimmering with the light of distant stars. In the center of the vast chamber, Ambassador Yellotharian stood at the speaker's podium, her blue-scaled hands gripping its edges so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Her voice, usually strong and confident in diplomatic circles, now trembled as she spoke to the hundreds of alien representatives before her. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Yela began, her words echoing through the silent chamber. I come before you today, not as a diplomat seeking trade agreements or territorial negotiations. I come as a mother, a daughter, a citizen of a world that faces certain death. She touched a control on the podium, and a holographic image appeared above the assembly. The planet Corellia hung in the air, beautiful and blue-green, its continents clearly visible through wisps of white clouds. But as the delegates watched, the image changed. The atmosphere began to thin and darken, storms raged across the surface, and the once vibrant world became gray and lifeless. This is what our scientists predict will happen to my homeworld in exactly 6 months and 12 days, ULA continued, her voice breaking slightly. A dark matter storm, the largest ever recorded, is moving through our sector of space. When it reaches Corellia, it will strip away our atmosphere like wind blowing dust from a table. 3 billion of my people will suffocate in the darkness. The chamber remained silent as Eula activated another display. This one showed their desperate attempts at solutions: massive atmospheric generators, planetary shields, evacuation ships. Each design was marked with red warnings: insufficient power, impossible construction timeline, inadequate capacity. Have tried everything, she said, her blue eyes glistening with unshed tears. Our greatest scientists have worked day and night for 2 years since we first detected the storm. We have built what atmospheric processors we could, but they will only delay the inevitable by weeks, perhaps months. We need help. She turned to face the section where the most powerful civilizations sat. The Corellian people have always been peaceful contributors to galactic society. We have shared our medical knowledge freely. Our artists have enriched cultures across 1,000 worlds. Our philosophers have helped shape the very laws that govern this council. Now we ask for help in return. The Valdorian delegate, High Prince Zorak, rose from his seat. His insectoid form towered over the other representatives, his forearms gesturing as he spoke. Ambassador Therian, the Valdorian collective sympathizes deeply with your plight. However, the distance to your system presents significant logistical challenges. Our transport capacity is currently committed to our own colonial expansion programs. Yella's shoulders sagged slightly, but she nodded respectfully. I understand, Your Highness. Perhaps a smaller contribution of evacuation vessels? The distances involved make even limited evacuation economically challenging, Zorak replied, his mandibles clicking in what might have been regret. Next, the Nexari Empire's representative stood. Admiral Vex Corlon, his cybernetic implants glowing softly in the chamber's light, spoke in his species. Characteristic monotone. The Empire calculates that a rescue operation would require 60% of our fleet capacity for a period of 8 months. This would leave our borders vulnerable and disrupt critical supply lines. The cost-benefit analysis does not support intervention. One by one, the great powers offered their carefully worded rejections. The Stellar Federation cited existing humanitarian commitments in other sectors. The hegemony's representative simply stated that their military doctrine did not permit operations in neutral space without strategic value. Even the usually generous Confederation of Free Worlds expressed regret that their resources were stretched too thin by recent conflicts. With each refusal, Yella seemed to shrink further. The proud ambassador, who had arrived with hope in her heart, was being crushed by the cold mathematics of galactic politics. Her people's lives were being reduced to budget calculations and resource allocations. Please, she whispered, though her voice still carried through the chamber's acoustics. We are not asking for charity. Corellia has rich deposits of rare minerals, advanced medical facilities, anything you need. We can pay, we can trade, we can offer technology exchanges, anything. But the delegates had already begun gathering there. materials, preparing to move on to the next agenda item. The session was effectively over. Yella stood alone at the podium, the hologram of her dying world still rotating slowly above her head. Yale's conversations resumed around the chamber. She collapsed into her chair, her body shaking with silent sobs. 3 billion people were counting on her, and she had failed them. The greatest diplomatic minds in the galaxy had just condemned her entire civilization to extinction with polite words and bureaucratic efficiency. The chamber began to empty as delegates filed out for the scheduled recess. The business of the galaxy would continue. Trade routes would be negotiated. Territorial disputes would be mediated, and somewhere in the darkness of space, a storm would continue its inexorable approach toward a world full of people who would soon have nowhere left to run then. Just as the last of the major delegates were leaving, a quiet voice spoke from the far corner of the chamber. Earth requests permission to address the council. The silence that followed the human's request was so complete that even the soft hum of the chamber's environmental systems seemed loud. Then, like a wave breaking against a shore, laughter began to ripple through the assembly. It started as quiet chuckles from some of the smaller delegations and grew into barely concealed amusement. From the major powers, in the furthest corner of the vast chamber, almost hidden behind a pillar, sat 3 figures in simple black uniforms. The human delegation was so small and unremarkable that many representatives had genuinely forgotten they were present. Earth had only been granted observer status in the Galactic Council 15 years ago, when they had finally achieved stable, faster-than-light travel. Even then, their ships were slow and primitive compared to the vessels used by established civilizations. Ambassador Jinwoo Park rose slowly from his seat, his movements deliberate and calm despite the mockery surrounding him. At 35 years old, he was barely an adult by the standards of species that lived for centuries. His black uniform was plain and functional, lacking the flowing robes of the Nexari, the gleaming biomechanical suits of the hegemony, or the crystalline armor of the Stellar Federation delegates. Council Speaker Thane Viridian, an ancient being, whose species had helped found the galactic government millennia ago, raised one of his 4 hands for silence. His voice carried the weight of eons as he spoke, though his tone dripped with condescension. The chair recognizes the representative from Earth, though we must remind the Assembly that humans hold only observer status and cannot propose binding resolutions. Jinwoo nodded respectfully and began walking toward the center of the chamber. His footsteps echoed in the massive space, each sound amplified by the crystalline walls. As he moved, whispered conversations began among the delegates. The Valdorian Prince leaned toward his aide, his mandibles clicking in amusement. The Nexari Admiral's cybernetic implants flickered as he accessed databases. He's probably reviewing humanity's limited military and technological capabilities. When Jinwoo reached the speaker's podium, he stood quietly for a moment, looking directly at Ambassador Eula. The Corellian woman had lifted her head from her hands, and her tear-stained face showed a mixture of curiosity and desperate hope. She had been abandoned by every major power in the galaxy, but something in the human's steady gaze seemed to offer comfort. Honored representatives, Jinwoo began, his voice clear and steady. I have listened carefully to today's discussions. I understand the tremendous challenges involved in helping the Corellian people. The distances are vast, the timeline is short, and the technical requirements are beyond what most civilizations could manage alone. Several delegates nodded, thinking the human was about to offer the same polite regrets they had heard all morning. The hegemony's representative had already turned back to his datapad. Dismissing the young species entirely, Jinwoo paused, his eyes sweeping across the assembly. When he spoke again, his words cut through the chamber like a blade. Earth will provide the assistance that Corellia requires. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter, with delegates turning to each other in disbelief. Some laughed outright at what they saw as naive bravado. Others simply stared at the human in confusion, wondering if he had misunderstood the scope of the crisis. Hive Prince Zorak of the Valdorians was the first to respond, his mandibles clicking in what his species used to express amusement. Human, Your enthusiasm is admirable, but perhaps you do not fully grasp the magnitude of this situation. Your species has barely left your own solar system. You lack the industrial capacity, the advanced technology, and the logistical networks necessary for such an undertaking. Admiral Vex Corlan of the Nexori Empire activated his translation implants to ensure his words carried maximum impact. Human. Vessel construction is limited to basic designs. Your fastest ships require weeks to travel distances our fleets cover in days. Your total space-based population numbers in the thousands, while this operation would require millions of workers. Even the smaller delegations began voicing their doubts. The Centauri Federation's representative, usually supportive of newer species, shook his head sadly. Earth's heart may be in the right place, but good intentions cannot substitute for capability. Through it all, Ginwu remained calm, his expression unchanging as the criticism washed over him. He waited patiently for the voices to quiet before responding, his composure somehow more impressive than all the advanced technology and ancient wisdom surrounding him. "You are correct about our limitations," he said simply. "Our ships are slow. Our technology is primitive, and our resources are limited compared to yours." He turned slightly, looking once again at Ambassador Eula, whose blue eyes were fixed on his face with desperate attention. "But we have something else that seems to be in short supply in this chamber today." The assembly fell silent, waiting for his explanation. Jinwu's voice grew stronger, carrying a conviction that seemed to fill the vast space around them. "We keep our promises." The words hung in the air like a challenge. In the corner where the human delegation sat, his two companions stood as well, their faces showing the same quiet determination. Across the chamber, Ambassador Yella slowly rose from her chair, tears streaming down her face, but her expression transforming from despair to something that looked remarkably like hope. The emergency assembly hall in Geneva had never seen anything like this before. Scientists, engineers, military officers, and government officials from every nation on Earth packed into the massive auditorium. The air buzzed with nervous energy as people whispered to each other, trying to understand why they had been summoned with such urgency. Outside, news crews from around the world waited for any information about what was being called the most important meeting in human history. Dr. Sujin Kim walked onto the stage, her simple white lab coat making her look small against the enormous backdrop displaying Earth's flag. 42, she was one of the youngest people ever to head the global science initiative. But her calm demeanor had earned respect from colleagues across the planet. Today, however, even she felt the weight of what she was about to propose. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced sound system. "3 days ago, our ambassador to the Galactic Council made a promise that has never been attempted in the history of our species. We told the Corellian people that we would save their world from a dark matter storm that will kill 3 billion beings." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Many had heard rumors about the council meeting, but few knew the details of what had been promised. Suzhen activated the holographic projector, and a 3-dimensional image of the Carolean system appeared above the stage. The blue-green planet hung in space, beautiful and serene, while a massive dark cloud approached from the edge of the display. "The plan is ambitious," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "We will construct a solar deflection array capable of protecting an entire planet. This array will work together with atmospheric stabilization technology that as of this moment does not exist. We have exactly 5 months and 3 weeks to design, build, and deploy the largest engineering project in human history." The hall erupted in shocked conversations. Dr. Hyen-Su Lee, the respected head of the Asian Space Consortium, stood up from his seat in the front row. His gray hair and weathered face showed the strain of years spent pushing the boundaries of human space exploration. "Sujin, with all due respect, the energy requirements alone would exceed our global power output by a factor of 10. We would need to harness the power of our sun itself to generate the kind of energy needed for planetary protection." Sujin nodded, having expected this challenge. "Which is why we are not limiting ourselves to Earth's resources. We are going to strip mine the asteroid belt, every piece of metal, every rare element. Every source of materials between Mars and Jupiter will be harvested for this project. She touched another control, and the hologram changed to show the solar system. Hundreds of small dots appeared throughout the asteroid belt, each one representing a potential mining site. Every available ship, from military vessels to civilian cargo freighters, will be converted for this mission. We will build more ships than we have ever built before. Minister Dal-Yun Choi from the United Earth government rose from her seat, her expression showing the concern of someone who had to think about practical matters like budgets and resources. Dr. Kim, the cost of such an undertaking would bankrupt every nation on Earth. We are talking about the entire economic output of our planet for several years. Sujin looked directly at the minister, her voice becoming firm and unwavering. The cost is irrelevant. We gave our word to the Corellian people. Ambassador Park stood before the greatest powers in the galaxy and promised that Earth would help when no one else would. The entire project will require coordination between our species like never before, but it is not impossible. It is just unprecedented. The hall fell silent as the full weight of what she was proposing sank in. Dr. James Wilson, head of the European Space Agency, raised his hand. Sujin, even if we could gather the materials and energy, we lack the technology to build atmospheric processors on the scale needed. We would need to invent entirely new sciences. Then we will invent them, Sujin replied simply. We will work together, share every piece of knowledge, and push the boundaries of what humans can achieve. We will do this because we said we would, and because 3 billion lives depend on our success. As the meeting continued deep into the night, one thing became crystal clear to everyone in the hall. Humanity was about to attempt something that would either secure their place in galactic history as the species that kept impossible promises, or serve as their most spectacular failure, witnessed by civilizations across the stars. The debates were intense, the challenges seemed insurmountable, and the timeline appeared impossible. But as the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. Instead of arguing about whether the project could be done, the assembled experts began discussing how it would be done. Within 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion, mining operations began throughout the solar system. Ships that had been built for peaceful cargo runs were retrofitted with mining equipment. Earth's shipyards, which had been running at normal capacity, suddenly began operating around the clock. Volunteers enlisted in numbers that overwhelmed processing centers worldwide, with people from every nation and profession demanding to be part of humanity's greatest undertaking. The impossible task had begun, and humanity was determined to prove that some promises were worth keeping, no matter the cost. The darkness of hyperspace suddenly gave way to brilliant starlight as the UES determination dropped back into normal space. Captain Donghan Park felt his stomach lurch from the transition, but his attention was immediately focused on the command displays showing the fleet's arrival. At 28 years old, he was the youngest person ever to command a fleet operation, but the weight of billions of lives had aged him considerably over the past 5 months. "Fleet status report," he called out, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Lieutenant Ji Hai Nam, his communications officer, worked frantically at her station as data streamed in from across the fleet. "All primary vessels accounted for, Captain. We have 8,214 ships reporting ready status." Her voice caught slightly as she continued, "Sir, the Carolians are transmitting gratitude messages on all frequencies. They... They cannot believe we actually came." Deng Hain allowed himself a small smile as he looked through the main view screen at the planet below. Corellia hung in space like a blue-green jewel, its white clouds swirling peacefully across continents that housed 3 billion souls. It looked so normal, so alive, that it was hard to believe death was racing toward it through the void. But when Dong Haiyan adjusted the view screen to show the wider system, the approaching horror became visible. The dark matter storm appeared as a massive distortion in space itself, like looking at the universe through a broken lens. It twisted light and bent reality around it, creating a wall of cosmic destruction that would strip away Corellia's atmosphere like wind blowing dust from a table. "How long until the storm reaches the planet?" Dong Hien asked. 74 hours, 18 minutes, Captain," replied his science officer, Ensign Tomyan.
Oh.
"The storm is moving faster than our original calculations predicted." Dong Hien felt his chest tighten. They had planned for 78 hours of setup time, and now they had lost almost 4 hours before they even began. "Begin immediate deployment of the solar array. All ships, execute protocol. Shepard." The next several hours transformed the space around Corellia into a hive of desperate activity. Massive cargo ships opened their holds and began releasing components that had been built in Earth shipyards and asteroid mining facilities. Each piece was precisely designed to lock together with others, forming a protective shell around the planet that would deflect the worst effects of the dark. It's a matter storm. Smaller ships darted between the larger vessels like worker bees, carrying crews and equipment to assembly points throughout the system. The work was dangerous beyond anything humans had attempted before. The approaching storm was already generating radiation fields that could kill an unprotected person in minutes. But the crews worked anyway, protected only by hastily upgraded shielding that had been installed during the journey. Chief Engineer Min Ho Jung coordinated the atmospheric processor deployment from the flagship, his multiple screens showing the progress of hundreds of different components. Each processor was designed to maintain Corellia's atmosphere even if the storm managed to penetrate their defenses. The technology was so new that the final designs had been completed during the voyage to the Corellian system. Engineering to bridge. Minho's voice crackled over the communication system. "We have a problem with the northern array. The Youth Resilience reports that their shielding is failing under the radiation bombardment." Dong Han watched through the view screen as the Resilience, one of their largest construction ships, was caught in a burst of energy from the approaching storm. The ship's hull glowed red-hot for several seconds before the radiation passed, leaving the vessel scarred but still functional. "Can they continue operations?" Dong Han asked. "They say they can, but they are operating at the edge of what their equipment can handle." "We are all operating at the edge, Captain." Ours passed in a blur of constant activity and growing tension. Ships moved in carefully coordinated patterns, each one playing a crucial role in building humanity's desperate gambit. The Corellian people watched from their planet's surface, many of them gathering in public squares to look up at the thousands of lights moving across their sky. Dong Hien came a familiar voice over the private communication channel. It was his older brother Ginwoo, calling from the diplomatic vessel that had accompanied the fleet. "Yes, brother. The storm front will reach us in 6 hours.
Are we
going to make it?" Dong Hien looked at his status displays, showing the progress of construction throughout the system. They were behind schedule. Several key components were still being assembled, and 3 ships had already suffered critical damage from radiation exposure. By every reasonable calculation, they were going to fail. "We will make it, brother. We have to." The final hours were a race against cosmic destruction. As the dark matter storm approached, its effects grew stronger, making the work even more dangerous. Several crew members were injured when their ship's shielding failed completely, but they continued working even as they were evacuated to medical facilities. When the storm finally struck, it hit the improvised human shield like a hammer blow against glass. For several terrifying minutes, it seemed as though their desperate construction would shatter under the assault. Energy readings spiked beyond anything the instruments could measure, and several of the outer array components were torn away by forces that defied understanding, but the shield held. Humanity's improvised protection deflected the worst of the storm's power. While the atmospheric processors worked frantically to maintain Corellia's life-giving atmosphere, across the galaxy, their civilizations watched in stunned silence as the impossible became reality before their eyes. 6 months had passed since the dark matter storm struck the Corellian system, and the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council looked exactly the same as they always had. But everything else had changed completely. Ambassador Jinwoo Park walked through corridors that once echoed with dismissive whispers about humanity, now filled with respectful nods and curious glances from representatives of civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. The human delegation no longer sat in the furthest corner of the assembly chamber, half hidden behind pillars where they could be easily forgotten. Their seats had been moved to the inner circle, right alongside the great powers that had once mocked their naive promises. Representatives from dozens of species approached them before each session, some offering congratulations, others quietly, asking if Earth might be interested in discussing certain problems their own worlds were facing. Today's session was special. It had been called specifically to address what the galactic media was calling the Corallian miracle, though everyone knew there had been nothing miraculous about it. It had been pure human stubbornness, combined with an industrial effort that had surprised even Earth's allies, Ambassador Yella. Therian walked to the speaker's podium with the same grace she had shown 6 months earlier. But now her blue-scaled face glowed with health and confidence. Her world was alive, her people were safe, and she carried herself like someone who had witnessed the impossible become reality. Honored members of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice strong and clear, carrying easily through the vast chamber. 6 months ago, I stood in this same place and begged for help to save my world. I was told by the greatest civilizations in the galaxy that what I asked was impossible, too expensive, too dangerous, too far away to matter. She paused, looking directly at the representatives who had refused her pleas. None of them met her gaze. Today I stand before you as the representative of 3 billion living Corallians who should, by all reasonable calculations, be dead. Our atmosphere should have been stripped away, our cities should be frozen ruins, and our children should never have seen another sunrise. But they did see that sunrise, and they will see many more, because one species chose to keep their word. When everyone else offered polite excuses, the chamber remained completely silent. Even the soft background hum of the environmental systems seemed muted as Yala continued her address. That species was not the oldest, or the most advanced, or the most powerful. They were humans, who had barely learned to travel between stars, who owned ships that most of you would consider primitive, whose technology we had always thought of as quaint and limited. But they had something that apparently was, in short, supply among the rest of us. They meant what they said. She turned toward the human delegation, and Jinwoo felt the weight of billions of eyes upon him. Corellia formally requests permanent alliance status with Earth. Furthermore, we propose that humanity be granted emergency intervention authority for humanitarian crises throughout the galaxy. The vote that followed was unlike anything in the Council's long history. There was no debate, no committee review, no lengthy diplomatic negotiations. The proposal passed with unanimous support, something that had never happened before with such a significant resolution. After the session ended, Jinwoo walked slowly through the corridors outside the chamber, still trying to process what had happened. His younger brother Dong Haiyan caught up with him near the massive viewing portal that looked out at the stars. 3 more species have requested private meetings this week, Dong Haiyan reported, checking his communication device. The Therians have a mining colony that is trapped by seismic activity on one of their outer worlds. The Corvani are facing some kind of plague that their medical technology cannot cure. And the Zentari have sent a message about a technological crisis that they say threatens their entire civilization. Jinwoo nodded, looking out at the vast field of stars visible through the portal. Somewhere out there, problems were waiting that other species had decided were too difficult, too expensive, or too dangerous to solve. 6 months ago, he would have felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. Now he felt something different. Purpose. What did you tell them? Dong Haiyan smiled, the same expression he had worn when they first decided to help the Corallians. Same thing we told Ambassador Yula when everyone else said it was impossible. We will find a way. News of humanity's new role spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Within days, reports were coming in from across known space about other species that had heard the story and were beginning to reconsider their own responses to seemingly impossible problems. Earth's reputation was crystallizing into something completely new. A species that made promises other civilizations would not make, kept promises other civilizations could not keep, in a universe that had grown too practical for miracles. Too calculating for acts of pure compassion, humanity had become something unexpected. They had become hope itself, in the form of beings who looked at impossible odds and said simply, "We will find a way." The galaxy was learning a fundamental truth about humans that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. They did not just survive impossible odds when faced with their own destruction.
Oh.
They made impossible odds possible for others, even when those others were complete strangers, living on worlds they had never seen, simply because they had given their word, and in a galaxy full of ancient wisdom and advanced technology. That simple human trait was proving to be the most powerful force of all.